My name is Lonnie Colson. I grew up here in Wellington. I've since moved off, but I received the invitation for this event, and I couldn't turn it down. Living history is something I think is really important for education. Yesterday we were able to have a couple hundred kids come through here. I mean, they had a ton of questions. They were able to ask and handle things, and they're able to have hands-on history. And rather than just kind of reading it in a book or seeing something on your iPad, they're actually able to come here, pick it up, handle it, and we're able to dispel a lot of myths that you see from watching Netflix or some TV show or old movie. So yeah, it's that a lot of it here is the Civil War era, but you have some that's a little later, and then some that's quite a bit earlier. Well, ever since I was growing up here as a little kid, I've always really been into the Middle Ages. So I really enjoyed reading King Arthur and watching some of the old movies with Lancelot and Galahad, and that's how it started. And from there, I read other stories, and then I started trying to look into and learn more about it. But it was always the English knight, the knight in England, that most fascinated me. And then as you learn more about history, you naturally just find some area that you really focus in on. And for me, it was right around the year 1450, just that kind of given time frame. The arms and armor just were what I really enjoyed, and so that's what I focused in on. So my armor that I wear here has been made for me. It's modeled off of a suit that's in the museum in Vienna. It belonged to a German that we call today Frederick the Victorious. And the funny thing about it is, so the armor itself was made in Milan, Italy, by one of the real famous workshops there, the Massaglia family workshop. The gentleman, Frederick, he was in France at the time, and so it is in what they would term a French style. And then again, it was for someone who was from Germany, in the German states. So, it's very cosmopolitan, I guess you could say. But it shows how widely arms and armor were distributed, around Europe and things like that. Milan was a huge center of armor. They had all the resources and everything was just right. There was a lot of things that just came together right for Milan to where they were able to mass produce it so fast and so well in such good quality that they were known all across Europe as having, superior armor. So I worked with Dr. Capwell at the Wallace Collection in London, among a few others, and they helped me to take what was the Frederick was a basic Italian export, and to add a few tweaks here and there that would make it look like it appealed to an English knight. Well, so what I've tried to do is I've tried to just find a wide variety of things that a knight from 15th century England might possess. Hunting was a really big part of being a knight. You couldn't train and joust, every day of the week. So something they really considered, a number of the people that were from the time wrote about that hunting was better training for war than jousting or anything else.
Yeah, we were looking at the priests.
It was one of the big sports of the nobility. So I've got a few areas here that just showed some of the different aspects of it, different depending on what you were hunting, how big the arrowhead was, and then I do have an example. This one is actually made by William West in England. It's a really close copy of one that's from the Mary Rose. So it gives you an idea of the weight, the handmade bodkin down here of a war arrow, and you can see this is what the English would have deployed on the battlefield against an enemy. But not everybody hunted all the time with the bow. Some people carried a crossbow. So I have a crossbow here. It was made by a gentleman named Todd in England, and it's got horn inlay and everything to kind of make it look like it's something more for the nobility, something not just a common person would have, but something that someone of a higher echelon would have. So I have a bolt case here that's covered in fur and leather. And there's different size bolts from there. There's actually, that one there is actually 450-pound draw weight, so you can't just pull it back by hand. So you have a special lever under here called a goat's foot lever, and that's how you would span it so that you can fire it. Moving on from there, I have several helmets here because one helmet was never enough. So at night, it depends on what job you're going to do, what activity you're doing. You'd have a number of different kind of helmets that you could use. The most general purpose one is the Sallet. That is the one right there on the right. It's very comfortable, it's very breathable. There is another plate that you can wear on the bottom that covers the chin, but even it can lower down so that your mouth is exposed. You can raise the visor up, and so if you're just going through the country, you know, you want some protection, but you also want to be comfortable, that's a good one. If you're really thinking about more of a contact where you want something a little more, there's the Italian Armet here. That it actually has a plate in front of it you can see called a wrapper, and so if I'm out there on the field and somebody hits me with a lance, you don't want that visor to get knocked up and expose my face, so that wrapper protects and it takes that blow so that the visor stays closed unless I want to raise it. And then finally you have the Grand Bassinet here. It's actually the copy of the one that went with the armor that I have, but it's a helmet for war or for heavy tournaments, so you can see it's very heavy duty. That visor is fairly thick, but it's also got breaths on it, those holes that make it look like a cheese grater. That allows you to get some air in. And plus it's got these narrow little horizontal slits. Those are eye slots. And that gives you actually a very good view all around. So that gives you the most protection and the most visibility right there that you can get. And then in front of it also has an exchange visor. So if we were jousting with solid lances in a tournament, that I would switch out that visor with this one here. And it would keep me alive, keep me safe, even though somebody's hit me, a charging horse with a lance that has steel cornell on the front of it, right there in the face. You can survive that. The saddle was made by a gentleman in Poland, and it's a copy of one that's in an image in the Coventry church. And so it is a mid-15th century everyday saddle. Now, a saddle for war, it would have a much larger front side there, and they would also be covered with steel plate to protect from a lance or a blow, in the kind of the exposed area in front. But that just gives you an idea of what a saddle from the time would look like. So if so many times today people get the idea that you'll watch a movie or you watch something on say Netflix, and they try to tell you, man, this is so well done. We've done so much research, but there's so many myths that they show you that armor just not protecting the people, or not being able to move, or just having to trudge. But if you can't move and if you can't do everything that you normally do out of armor in armor, then you can't fight in armor, and you're useless on the battlefield. It was like people try to. They've got this idea that the samurai and some of the other countries, their fighters and their sword techniques were so far superior, and that the only thing the knight or the medieval warrior ever did was just hack and slash. But that's not the case. And the way we know that is there are a number of books and manuals that have survived, and they explain. The gentleman here, this was from a gentleman named Talhofer, who was in the middle of the 15th century in Germany. But his specialty was he made his living off of training people to survive judicial duels. And so depending on what class you were and what kind of duel it would be, whether you could afford all armor or it was a husband and a wife having a fight. And it was a judicial duel, so it was to the death. But he let you know the technique that you could use to survive. And it was a big spectacle. You could see these very, very odd looking shields here, with all these points on them and these guys are wearing leather suits that they've, kind of unitard suits that they've been stitched into. It's been covered with like grease or lard to make them slippery. And the whole town, everybody came out to watch, people fight to the death. So, I mean, I guess you could say there's a gruesome aspect to it, but, there's also, there's technique to it. And that was what he made his living on. There are other books that have survived from different masters from Italy and in Germany and other countries that where they talk about the techniques that you use in armor, out of armor, with this weapon, with that weapon, and that's what we do and that's what we study. Anytime somebody comes over and takes a look at the arrows, the first thing they always do is they ask, "What's this one?" Because this one is very odd looking. I'm not for sure if there are actually any actual ones that survive, but there are depictions of them. And generally, they refer to this as a fire arrow, cage arrow. You can fill this gap here with tow and pitch, set it to fire, and you can fire it at the castle, the shingles on a building or on a tower. and with a little bit of luck, maybe one of them will catch something to fire in the light. It's not quite like you see in movies where they wrap, you know, a whole big thing around it and light it on fire on the shaft. That's just going to burn everything up, and it's not going to make it. So this is what you would use to hopefully set afire a place that you're besieging. In general, the bow was used for either hunting or for war. If you're hunting and you're hunting something big, then you've got a number of larger type arrowheads that you can use to take down a large animal or a horse. Once you get into some of the smaller ones, you have smaller ones, and again, you know, it depends on what your target is, what you're going for. And then finally, you have a war arrow. So it's got a hardened steel bodkin. So this is hand forged by a guy named William West in England. It's much heavier duty. You would have to have a very heavy longbow to pull this back. From the time period, most of them were around 100 to 120 pound draw weight. Some of them were up 180 pound or more. So you can tell to really be able to put these into effect, you had to have a whole lot of upper body strength. And that was the reason the English were kind of unique to other countries is they had the culture, and they maintained the culture that young men starting from a young age would start to practice with pulling that bow at weekly butts, and you know, every Sunday. And as they got bigger and stronger, they could pull more back, and so they could field thousands of men that could pull back 100 more pound draw weight and could consistently do it. So they could take a sheaf of arrows, a dozen arrows, stick them in the ground in front of them, and as the enemy charged, they would able to just pick it up, fire it. As soon as it would come back to their ear, they'd loose the arrows, and so they could get 10 or 12, you know, on the way within a minute. That's each person, so you combine that with you know, several thousand archers on each wing of your dismounted troops, and I mean, you could rain hate and discontent on the enemy. One of the other misconceptions a lot of people have is that you got to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to hold a medieval sword, that it was all about just brute strength, and that the swords were super heavy, but they weren't. By the time you get to this much armor here, a sword blow isn't really going to hurt me anyway. So swords became more tapered and more needle-like. This right here is a mid-15th century longsword. And you can see it's very tapered, and it comes to a needle-like point. And it's not heavy at all. I can wield it with one hand if I need to. Once I add that second hand onto it, I can really whip it around, and I can control where I'm pointing it, where I'm thrusting. And if I was having to fight someone who was wearing armor like me, just hitting me with the sword isn't going to hurt me. Not at all. All it does is make a whole lot of noise. The only thing you could luckily do is if you hit just right and you cut this strap, now, you know, my breastplate and the placard hangs down a little bit, or if you cut one of these points, I'm going to have a plate hanging off. But it's not going to hurt me unless that comes off, and then you're able to hit there. But if you're really wanting to end a fight quick, you're going to have sword. So the blade is sharp from, say, it's much sharper from this point right here. Down here they didn't sharpen it quite as much. I can grab it. I don't just grab the blade, but you grab it, kind of palm it, and you wrap it here. And with this, I can get a good grip on it, and I can use it like a spear. And so I can try to go up under an armpit, under the groin. I can try to come down up through these lanes here. If I can try to go through some of these plates here. You look for any chink in the armor. We still use that phrase, but that's where it comes from. Is I'm looking for a weakness, a weak point, a vital area. I can't, like we were discussing about riding a horse in the saddle, I have to leave this area open or I can't ride a horse. And that's a very vital thing for me. I can't put plates under the arms because then I can't lower my arms. So we cover that with mail. So, I mean, it's very well made. All these rings are either solid or they're riveted together, so it makes them very strong. And so it's a very flexible material of steel. So it's good protection, but it's not as good as hard metal steel. As we said, just hitting me with a sword isn't going to hurt that armor. But one of the things that really is beneficial about armor is it's very smooth. It's that by design. Because that being smooth, it makes anything that hits you like an arrow want to glance off. If you don't hit it at just the right angle, it's not even going to have any it's not going to stick. What we call purchase. It's just going to want to glance off. So they came up with things like this. This right here is just a very short warhammer. They have some versions that we have over here that are actually a full pole length size. So this long, that goes all the way to the ground. So I can really get a good leverage like this, and I can deliver a whole lot of force. The reason it has these sharpened little prongs like teeth here is that helps grip. So if all that blow hits and it doesn't glance off, and it hits right here, even if it doesn't crack the steel, or it hit it with this in here, and it doesn't penetrate, that concussive force still goes into me, and I feel it. It can make me sick at my stomach. If I get hit in the head, I mean, you can really ring somebody's bell, or you just kind of give them. I've seen a demonstration where somebody hit somebody with a pommel that was wearing a helmet, and it made it sick of their stomach, just because it's so much force going into your body that you survive it. You're not broken, but you feel it, and it hurts. And again, this right here, you notice this shape right here, it was called the bec de corbe, and it was the raven's beak, because it looks like the beak of a raven, and it's just perfect for the punching power that you would want to try to break through a helmet and punch through a helmet. And then right here, you can try to go through the ocular, through the eye slot, or you can try to go up underneath the armpit and go several inches in. And so it's a very devastating weapon for somebody on armor, fighting someone in armor. There are other fancier designs, the same concept. Another very unique weapon, like this right here. This is a tournament sword. So the thing about it is there was one special kind of tournament or event in the tournament called the Mounted Melee. I guess you could say the word melee is just a fancy French word for beat each other to death. But the concept was you took something about the half the size of a football field or so, and you fenced it off with, heavy-duty timbered fence. And so all the crowds can get together, and they can be on the outside watching it. So your knights would be in the full gala. Everything they've got crest on their helmets. They've got all their colors on. They're mounted. Their horses were in caparison. So they're a spectacle. And then you take a sword like this right here. There were some other weapons that they sometimes use, but this one here is an example of one that's been documented. And you basically just beat the other guy until he's ready to quit. The funny thing about this point here is, if you notice, we don't want to kill anyone. This is still a tournament. It's still a sport. So the idea is not to kill someone. But if he's riding at me and I'm swinging, I've got my sword out, and as it comes close to him, and it just happened to go right here into that eye slot, you notice it pokes in a little bit where he sees that end, but it's not going to go in and actually make contact with him. Not going to blind him, not going to hurt him, but he definitely knows that he would have died if that had been real. And so again, that's just a very, very unique weapon just for the tournament. But as we look through here and we look through some of the other masters, you'll see that in armored fighting, once we start off with the big pole axes, the big axe heads on a big haft, and you just beat each other. Eventually, one of them's going to lose one, or one's going to break. You're going to pull out the swords. You use the sword. Eventually, you're going to get worn out, tired. Somebody gets disarmed. Most of the time, it comes down to the dagger. So it would always be right here on my side. So once we came down, or if we came into grappling, we fell on the ground. Now it's just basically a wrestling match. So I'm trying to get around to get his visor open and finish the fight so that I live and I get to go home.